following is a production of Cary TV, the Town of Cary's government access channel.
I would like to call to order our December 16th Cary Planning and Zoning Board, and we will begin with adopting an agenda. Do we have any adjustments to the agenda? If not, could I have a motion to adopt?
I do have an adjustment. I believe it was Mr. Miller who moved for approval of the minutes.
Okay, so that's going to be of the minutes. We're just adopting the agenda.
Oh, the agenda, no.
Okay. Do we have any adjustments to tonight's agenda? If not,
I'll move that we adopt tonight's agenda as published.
Mr. Miller has made a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second from Mr. Rogers. Discussion. All those in favor say aye. 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 That motion carries unanimously. And I will point out that we were our board of 8 tonight. One of our members is home ill. And now we will move on to approving our meeting minutes. And since I think we have some corrections,
Right.
Let's start with the regular meeting minutes from November 18th. Do we have adjustments or corrections?
The only one that I have is Mr. Miller moved for the minute approval from the previous meeting before that.
All right. Do we have any other adjustments? In that case, could we have an motion with that adjustment?
I move for
Okay.
the approval. On the November 18th, Mr. Miller moved approval of the minutes. Okay. So I moved approval.
We have a motion. We have a second from Mr. Rogers. Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Let's move on then to approve the minutes of our work session on November 25th. Do we have any adjustments to those minutes? Can we have a motion then?
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, that motion carries unanimously, and we're going to move on to our public hearings. And before we begin, I just want to lay out a couple of process things. We will begin with a staff presentation at the podium to my left, to your right. Following the staff presentation, I will open the public hearing, and we will begin with a presentation from the applicant, and that presentation is limited to 10 minutes. After the applicant's presentation, we'll invite any other citizens that would like to address us on that particular case to approach. Please give a comment card to our clerk and speak at the podium to my right, which is to your left. And you're going to notice there's a little black box on that podium that's going to have 3 lights on it. When you begin, there will be a green light lit. You will have 5 minutes to speak, so after 4.5 minutes, that green light will turn to orange. and after 5 minutes, it'll turn to red, and at that point, I'm going to ask you to conclude your remarks to be fair to other speakers. I'm going to ask you to be concise, to avoid repetition. If multiple people have the same perspective, please pick a spokesman. And please direct your comments to the entire board, and don't be disappointed if we don't ask you any questions. It's our opportunity to listen to you, so we usually don't ask questions. Following that, I will close the public hearing and we will open the case up for discussion and questions from the board. At that point in time, we may ask the applicant to come back and address us. With that, I'd like to start our first case recording a public hearing, and that's our LDO amendments round 27. And this is just going to be items A through D, F, and G, as I understand it. And Ms. Bierman?
Good evening. This is the public hearing on the round 27 amendments to the Land Development Ordinance. This is a list of the 7 items that were included in round 27, and as you mentioned, I will be discussing 6 of those, and then item E related to champion trees will be presented separately following this public hearing. So I'll go through each of those quickly for you. There are detailed background material and the actual text of the amendments in your staff report. Item A relates to downtown housing options. It provides for more housing options in the downtown area. Currently, new detached dwellings are not permitted in the high-intensity mixed-use sub-district of the town center. The proposed changes would allow new detached residential in the HMXD, but only in the downtown historic district. Approval of a special use permit would be required, and also if the property was designated as a landmark, then a certificate of appropriateness from Wake County would also be required. The amendment would also add detached multifamily as a new use in the permitted use table. This would allow 3 or more dwellings on a single lot on an individual property, and that could be in common ownership or in a condominium form of ownership. And also flag lots could be created in the downtown historic district that would enable subdivision of lots containing contributing structures, provide a little bit more flexibility for development of those lots. This shows a boundary. The pink boundary is the outline of the historic district. The gray, brownish parcels in the interior are those in the HMXD sub-district, so those are the parcels that could be affected by this amendment. The amendment would also, well, there were 2 key aspects of the amendment. One related to the detached residential, adding the detached residential uses, and the other with the flag lot. When you discussed this at your work session, there was a general sense of agreement related to the creation of flag lots. However, your board expressed some concern with allowing the detached structures outside of that. So we did, at your request, prepare a second option for consideration that's included in the staff report. The difference between those 2 options is basically that the option 2 would maintain the provisions for creating the flag lots. Otherwise, in order to develop single-family uses, you would just applicant would go through the current option of rezoning to a sub-district that would allow detached dwellings. Item B addresses density limits for life care facilities. Currently, life care facility units are counted the same as detached dwellings when you calculate density. The proposed amendment would apply in non-residential zoning districts, and their buildings with 3 or more units would be treated as, or units within buildings with 3 or more units would be treated as equivalent to half a dwelling unit for the purpose of calculating density. This table shows where life care facilities are allowed and the associated maximum densities as currently required. The proposed amendment would apply in the office institutional and the office research and development district. And this is a comparison to show that this approach is consistent with the approach used in other jurisdictions, including Raleigh and Durham, and recognizes that individual rooming units or dwelling units in life care type facilities have a different level of impact than a standard single-family dwelling. This next item, C, would implement the town's authority to publish public hearing notices on the town's website instead of in the newspaper. We would continue to post property and mail notices to the nearby residents, those within 400 feet of the site, so those provisions would remain unchanged. We would also be looking at ways to enhance the town's website that we currently have to make the advertising page more robust and user-friendly. And as part of this, we'd be including an email subscription that citizens could sign up for to make sure that the website adequately provides that information. Item D would bring the LDO into compliance with new laws requiring local governments to approve eligible facilities requests to co-locate antenna-type equipment on existing towers. Eligible facilities are those that would increase the tower height by no more than 10% or add an antenna or other type of appurtenance that would protrude less than 20 feet horizontally from the structure, and also would not increase the area of an existing equipment compound by 2,500 square feet or more. And again, these are changes that are brought about due to statutory changes. Item F would provide a more flexible building envelope in the R8 district. Currently, the minimum side yard setback in R8 is 10 feet. We did have a request from a developer to reduce the minimum setback while retaining the combined setback for both sides of 20 feet. The purpose of this request was simply to provide some flexibility that could allow for a more accommodate side-loaded garages or other changes that could result in an improved lot design. Staff recommends a minimum setback of 5 feet and an aggregate setback of 20 feet. This is the same requirement that applies to lots in conservation subdivisions now, and we agree that this would provide greater flexibility in the building location design without increasing the intensity or density of development within a subdivision. This is an illustration that shows a sample lot with meeting the standard 10-foot setbacks, and you can see with the gray where a driveway location going into a garage could be. Under the proposed amendment, you can see that the lots could shift back and forth a bit more within the lot and then open up the possibility for the side-loaded garages. This last item includes some minor changes and corrections that would implement new laws related to the quasi-judicial hearings. These are some changes that were inadvertently left out when this issue was addressed in round 26, your last round of ordinance amendments. They included a number of changes related to this item, so this is just a bit of cleanup related to that. And this concludes staff's report comments on those items. I'll be glad to, well, and that would be open the public hearing, and then staff would be glad to answer any questions during that process.
Thank you. At this point, we would, I'd like to open the public hearing, and then usually we'd hear from the applicants, but since the applicant is us, I'm going to move right to public comment. So anyone that would like to address any of these ordinance amendments, would you please approach the podium? Anyone at all? Seeing no one approaching the podium, I'm going to close the public hearing and open up this case for board discussion and questions. And if we're a little reticent, I will point out to those in the gallery that we've had now 2 work sessions on these particular items, so we're somewhat conversant in their details. The fact that we aren't asking questions now indicates that we did some heavy lifting a little earlier.
I do have one item. Ms. Bierman, could you just re-review the item A, the 2 different options one more time, if you wouldn't mind?
So the two key aspects of the ordinance as listed here, one is allowing the new detached residential uses in portions of the HMXD. Right now, the single-family detached lots are not allowed in that district. So that's one component. The second component is allowing creation of flag lots. Option one, that was the staff recommendation of what was initially presented for public hearing, includes both of those aspects of the development. Option two was prepared based on the comments received at the work session. And what we heard there was that there was agreement with the portion related to creating flag lots. So that portion of the amendment under option two remains. However, the portion related to just simply allowing single-family detached homes in the HMXD subdistrict, there seemed to be some at the work session that wanted a second option, so that option is basically pulled out of the amendment. So anything changes to the permitted use table and any related changes to that were taken out of option two. The effect of that is to just maintain currently what the approach would be, which would be simply to rezone to a district that allowed single family.
Thank you.
Since it's been a couple weeks, I'm going to ask, the option one suggests that there is a strong desire to keep properties within the HMXD district, while our option two suggests that we think is just as appropriate to rezone those properties. Is there a staff concern that we not be rezoning individual properties within the HMXD district?
That's certainly a way that could be done. One aspect of the town center district that's a little bit different than the other districts that we have is the fact that the plan within the TCAP, the town center area plan, the land use plan designation and the zoning sub-district are one and the same. So if you change the zoning district, you're also making a change to the plan designation for the difference for the district. So it becomes a little bit more complicated because it's the, overlapping requirements there. So it could be done. I mean, you could get to the same point either way, either going through both plan amendment and the rezoning, which just is a bit higher level of scrutiny in terms of looking at the intent of the plan as a whole, and making any change to the zoning district has a corresponding impact on looking at the land use plan designation also. So
Let me see if I understand what you just said. Because in this particular district, we've defined the comprehensive plan definition, if you will, labeled to be the same as the zoning district. So therefore, anything that we would want to zone differently would require a plan amendment first, and then only after we did the plan amendment, we could come back and do a rezoning?
In order to, well, in practicality, because those two districts overlap, procedurally, we take those through together to try to simplify the process, since they are, in a sense, kind of a one-for-one relationship between the plan and the zoning. But I think the bigger issue is more of just looking at the integrity of the plan as a whole and the purpose of the district, and just looking at how the plan designations and the intent of the zoning district work together.
So I'm going to do another follow-up since everybody else seems to be quiet. Can you give us a sense, if you're a property owner and now you have to do a rezoning, what the process requires in terms of time and/or expense. If we went with the option 1, the property owner would simply be able to proceed with their plan without additional process. Is that correct?
Well, with option 1, the process would actually be a special use permit.
Or it would be a
It would be a
special
special use permit.
Okay, whereas option 2, it could be rezoning.
Option 2 would be rezoning. The time frame is longer for a rezoning and plan amendment, even with the two processes completely overlapping. The time process for that is about 4 months to go through that process. A special use permit is a shorter process as it goes to town council and typically is one hearing. However, the scrutiny at the special use process, the findings that are made, the process, the meeting process, and the requirements involved with the special use permit are different from rezoning, but the time frame is shorter for the special use permit as opposed to the rezoning.
Thank you. One more follow-up, and then I'm going to stop here. When you say the process is different for special use from a property owner's perspective, would that mean it's more difficult or more expensive for me to do a special use than a rezoning?
It is a quasi-judicial process. So where the council serves in a more quasi-judicial capacity, where there's evidence presented, there's no communication with board members or council members outside of the public hearing process. So it functions, more like a legal proceeding, where the council functions more as on a judge capacity with hearing evidence, specific evidence that and testimony that they base their decision on.
Okay, so I think
So it's a shorter process, but it's a different process when you're looking at the quasi-judicial hearings.
So I think I misspoke when I promised that was my last question. Just one more. If we selected option 1, would a property owner still have the option of doing a rezoning if he preferred that process?
The option to do a rezoning would always exist.
So he could either, if we selected option 1, he could either do a quasi-judicial hearing for a special use, or he could go through rezoning.
Oh,
He
I'm
could
sorry,
select which
no.
process.
With option 1, it would be quasi-judicial hearing only.
Okay, so there would be no rezoning as an option.
That wouldn't, no, that would not be necessary. Well, I suppose you could make that request to go that route, plan amendment and a rezoning, given that there would be a specific process specifically set up for this type of hearing. I don't know if that would be successful.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, do we have someone?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion. I move that the board forward LDO amendment correction. Round 27 amendments, items A through D, F, and G, with option 1 to town council with a recommendation for approval as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all the other applicable plans and is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons set forth in the staff report and presentation. And when I mentioned option 1, I was referring to item A.
We have a motion. Do we have a
And
second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion? Seeing none?
I'll say I definitely prefer option 2 on item A. I think that gives us a case-by-case way to handle these requests as opposed to something that applies to the entire historic district. I also have concerns about the certificate of appropriateness requirement, which only applies to landmarks, actually in either option, and not to contributing structures in the historic district. And so although I support all of the remaining amendments, I prefer option 2 on item A. So I will have to not support the motion with that caveat that that is the reason why.
We may come back. All right, other questions, observations? All those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye. Aye. Okay, I think I counted 7 of us. All those opposed?
No.
That's 7 to 1. That motion carries as proposed, and we're going to move on to our second public hearing case, which is LDO amendments, round 27, item E. And this is Mr. Barker.
Good evening. This item is amendments to the Champion Tree regulations. Since the October public hearing on this item, staff has held a stakeholders meeting as well as 2 work sessions with the Planning and Zoning Board. Based on that feedback, staff is recommending a 2-tier approach. The first approach is to adopt an amendment, which would be an interim amendment to the existing Champion Tree regulations to allow some more flexibility with removal of champion trees in certain circumstances. We feel like that doing a 2-tier approach, the second tier would be doing a more comprehensive review of the champion tree regulations to incorporate some of the suggestions by the stakeholders from the stakeholders meeting as well as from the board. So what I'd like to do is go over the interim amendment and then actually provide some feedback on some of the things we'll look at in the second tier amendment. Although our goal as a town is to preserve champion trees, we feel like as a staff there are certain cases where due to required infrastructure or roadways, there would be certain impacts to the critical root zones that would allow for reasonable removal of champion trees on site. And that's what this interim ordinance allows for, is the planning director shall allow removal of champion trees if more than 25% of the critical root zone is removed by certain things such as road connections or required infrastructure, utilities, roadways, pedestrian ways, potential stormwater treatment devices and associated grading, as well as certain site design requirements on the placement of buildings and other features. The second item to the interim amendment deals with replacement trees. The current ordinance allows for if a removal of a healthy champion tree, if you have like a 40-inch oak tree removed on a site, then you're required to put equal caliber inches of replacement trees on the site. So based on feedback from the Planning and Zoning Board in certain areas such as Town Center District where we're trying to create a more urban feel, and the Town Center District in some places are very urban anyway with limited areas to plant trees, that replacement trees in that district would be only to the extent it could be accommodated on the site. In addition, there's additional wording if replacement trees are to be provided on the site, that the developer or owner would execute a landscape agreement, guarantee the survival and health of the replacement trees. Staff is also recommending a couple of amendments to our definitions. First one is champion trees, that it maintains the majority of the champion tree definition that exists, except it also adds that a champion tree is not a champion tree if it's dead, diseased, or is abnormal in shape. So that wouldn't be considered a champion tree. Staff is recommending changes to the critical root zone to be more consistent with how we practically do it in the town. And that definition would be an underground circular area extending from the base of the tree's trunk a distance of at least 1 1/4 feet per inch of diameter or caliber. Okay. And finally, just to give you and the audience an overview of what we as a staff will be coming forth with you in March, February and March, would be looking at the second-tier amendment, which would define champion trees to be a certain percentage of the state champion tree list based on those species. Also to allow more flexibility with transferring open space requirements or buffers to preserve champion trees. That would exclude reducing those buffers adjacent to existing residential. Also, potentially looking at if you did have to remove champion trees, maybe saving existing tree stands that have existing trees that would equal the caliber inches of removal of champion trees. There was also things that we'd look at about maybe treating more redeveloped areas different than developing areas besides the town center district, and really getting pinpoint about when certain removal of champion trees would go to the town council. So with that, that concludes staff's presentation. And so after the presentation, staff would recommend an approval of the interim ordinance to the council. So I'll be happy to answer questions after the public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, I will open up the public hearing, and since, again, we don't have an applicant, the town is the applicant, and they've already made their case, I'm going to open up the public hearing for anyone else that would like to address us.
Good evening. My name is Suzanne Harris. I'm with the Home Builders Association of Raleigh-Wake County. I wanted to, first of all, thank you for, thanking the staff actually, and also all of you in the council for pulling together the stakeholder meeting. I felt that that was a very good opportunity for a lot of people to get around the table and to make suggestions. So I did appreciate the opportunity to be a part of that. Looking over the suggested changes and the two-tiered approach, I was hopeful that in that first tier, the issue of the definition of the champion trees would be addressed. And I know I was unfortunately not able to make the work session, and I know from looking at the minutes that you guys did have some discussion on that issue. And from what I'm hearing from my members from the residential community, that was the biggest issue that they were coming upon, was the sheer just simple 30-inch caliper definition of champion trees. And I know that there was some suggestions made that Ricky alluded to, that's going to hopefully be discussed coming up in the spring, regarding like the 75% of what the state deems to be a champion tree and that type of thing. I think 75% is what Raleigh does, actually, as their definition for a champion tree. But again, I don't know if there's an opportunity tonight to have some more discussion on that, or to look at including that in this E1 as opposed to waiting for E2, since that, at least from the residential community, was one of the larger concerns as to how that was being defined. So for what it's worth, if you're able to have any more discussion on that or consideration, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address us? Anyone at all? At this point then, saying no one approach the podium, I'm going to close the public hearing and open this case up for board discussion. Again, we're fairly silent, and I will point out this was the subject of two fairly extensive work sessions, so we've been through this and probably through this again. But if we have any other questions.
Well, just clarification or a restatement. What we're really looking at this evening is the interim ordinance amendment, with the expectation that this will come back in about first quarter of next year for a more comprehensive modification, correct?
That's correct. And to address the speaker's request, due to the timing, it's just difficult for staff to present something to the board that seemed reasonable and fair within a time frame, because we needed a little bit more time to research that about comparing the state champion trees, and it got a little bit complicated when we looked into it. But we are committed to move quickly on that, so there wouldn't be too much of a gap for the people that are submitting development plans to try to move forward. Like you said, probably in February, have a work session with the Planning and Zoning Board, and then March, your March meeting for something to council. So we feel like that's a reasonable time frame.
And just, so with respect to the public hearing comment, which I think is fair to address, I think what we learned at the work session is by using the percentage formula, which we sort of are leaning toward, choosing that right percentage could either expand or contract the definition of champion trees. And I think, as you said, it gets complex. And so the decision, I think what I heard from staff is we'd rather do more research and bring that back.
That's correct, and as committed to, staff will continue to share information with the stakeholders group as it's developed, and so they're aware of it, and so they can keep providing feedback to us.
So, other questions? I'd like to just probe a little bit, since this is an interim agreement, and I expect we're doing something now because there are some cases in process, some proposals in process that require some certainty today. The thing that those cases are going to have to deal with, or the assumption that those cases are going to have to deal with prior to our next revision, is that the 30-inch definition, or what is it that they will have to do interim to our final definition?
That is, if that's the issue, that all 30-inch trees are not alike. And
Right.
so that, that's the current ordinance as it exists today and has existed for quite some time. So anything we do will maybe enhance or improve that. So the other issue is today there is limited flexibility. They have to preserve trees no matter what. So there's really not much flexibility, and even if there's a road in the way or things of that sort, they still would have to try to save it. So it's kind of, we feel like this ordinance provides at least some flexibility for required improvements that they could, actually be able to develop property. And this doesn't cut off the ability for people to go to the town council and make the plea that this champion tree might not have merit to save, or they might need some more flexibility. So does that answer your question?
I think so. What I was really trying to get at is, I appreciate the other parts of this that make perfect sense, Obviously, if you're going to impact 25% of a root surface or root area.
Critical root zone, yeah.
Yeah, root zone, thank you very much. That makes perfect sense. I was really trying to get to the comment about the definition of what a champion tree is, and make sure that there isn't anything else we can probe into there in this interim step that helps out a little bit with that, because it seems as if there's still some anxiety about our current definition of what a champion tree is. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that was most definitely an issue. And to respond to that, I'm just not sure staff could present a credible recommendation at this time, because we really need a little bit more time. I hate to kind of move something forward at just to kind of like a guess of what would work. We feel like that because we want to get something in place to allow flexibility quickly, which would be the next council meeting Thursday. So we feel like that will provide a needed relief that doesn't exist today.
Thank you. Other questions?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Barker, I'd just like to maybe throw out again, as I did in the work session, that staff at least give some thought to the idea of a tree bank. I think in the work sessions, we discussed the fact that if you have to have X number of trees of X number caliber as a replacement for a champion tree, sometimes the restricted site doesn't have enough space because of the 30-foot, I think it's a 30-foot separation rule. And so therefore, instead of losing those trees, the builder could make a contribution to a tree bank, and that could be used in other sites, public land, schools, whatever. Again, just something to consider as you go forward with the other considerations with the champion tree statute.
We'll do that. We'll investigate that and then come back to you.
Other comments or questions?
One question for Mr. Barker. On 7.25C1, we describe how some conditions around champion trees. And it says here that in support of any application, a report from a registered landscape architect, arborist, or other such specialist would be entertained, and that would address the conditions listed in 3, like required road connections and all. What I'm curious about is the definition of champion tree, which says in there that a tree is diseased, it may not be a champion tree. Are we still requiring an arborist and not a landscape architect or any other person, but only an arborist to make that determination?
Yes, that's something that the staff would require as a certified arborist. We can look in that if we need to beef that up, but that's what how we would apply it, that we would need some kind of certified arborist to give us a report that it would be dead or diseased.
Other questions? Seeing none, can we have a motion, please?
I'll make a motion. I move that the board forward LDO amendment round 27, item E, to town council with a recommendation for approval as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans and is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons set forth in the staff report and presentation.
Do we have a second?
And I will second that.
We have a motion and a second discussion.
I'll just say that I wouldn't like this as the permanent long-term solution. I think we've all acknowledged it needs more work, and there's a lot more opportunity here. I think as an interim solution, it's provides some relief, and I don't think it's going to cause any harm. So I agree with the motion.
I believe that the interim solution is right for the time because from the community outreach and some of the sessions that you've met with the stakeholders, there's a lot of interest in this, and we want to get it right going forward. So I think this is a good way to do it, and at the same time, not harm projects that are already in the works right now, and they're waiting on the outcome of this. So I think this is a good step and a right step.
I'll just say I'm in agreement. In our work session, it was an item of discussion that I do think the definition of a champion tree is something that needs to be reworked. There are some vague aspects in there, coupled with some very specific elements of 30 inches. But that's what we have on the books now. So if we do nothing, that definition doesn't change. So this at least addresses a few things out there, but I am concerned about that definition. We can do better.
I'm in agreement. I think that it's a start, but we've got some work ahead of us.
In that case, other comments? Oh, I heard you draw your breath in. I'm sorry.
Just nodding, agreeing.
In that case, I'll call the vote. All those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye. Aye. Opposed, that motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
And we're going to move to our next case, which is 13 REZ 14, the Howell Tract, presented by Ms. Grannon. And this is a case without a public hearing.
Thank you. Good evening. This is a request to rezone approximately 14.76 acres located at the intersection of Davis Drive and Farm Pond Road. There is an associated annexation petition with this request. The property is currently outside our ETJ, and so the applicant has applied for annexation in addition to a rezoning. The property is highlighted here in yellow, showing its location along Davis Drive and north of Farm Pond Road. And an aerial view of the subject property shows that portions of it have been developed with single-family detached dwellings, associated outbuildings. A large portion of the property has been cleared. There's a farm pond located on the property. Cary's land use plan designates the property as low-density residential. The existing zoning is Wake County Residential 40, and the applicant has proposed residential 8 conditional use. Conditions proposed by the applicant are that the use be limited to detached residential, a maximum of 2 dwelling units per acre, and a maximum of 28 lots. You may recall this case was before you about a year ago. At that time, the applicant was proposing 3 dwelling units per acre and 43 lots. The applicant had the case denied and petitioned council to have a waiver to the 1-year waiting period. And with the changes, the council agreed to that waiver. So a brand-new case is before you tonight with these conditions. In addition to those I just mentioned, the applicant is also proposing a 20-foot wide perimeter buffer in common open space along the western and northern property lines, and has offered a condition stating that lots within 50 feet of Farm Pond Road subdivision shall have a minimum lot size of 20,000 square feet. And here is an exhibit proposed by the applicant. This hatched area shows 50 feet. So any lot that is within, not within that 50 feet, but any lot that has a portion of land within that 50 feet would need to be a minimum of 20,000 square feet. And then 8,000 obviously for the R8 zoning district. Property owners within 400 feet of the subject property were notified, and the property was posted and advertised. Community feedback addressed concerns regarding traffic, lot sizes, street connectivity, transitions between the zoning districts, and the rural character of the Farm Pond Road community. There were a lot of residents on Farm Pond Road that wanted to have a lot size of 20,000 square feet, wanted to find some way of preserving the rural character of their community. In contrast, there was general support for the rezoning request from the Stonecrest subdivision residents to the north. And then some neighbors in the vicinity expressed concerns that will be addressed at the time of site plan review pertaining to how stormwater would be managed on the future development. This map shows that there are stream buffers identified on Cary's GIS maps that will need to be addressed at the time of site plan review, and field determination will be required. Cary's Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Master Plan shows a street side trail along Davis Drive and along Farm Pond Road adjacent to the subject property. And Davis Drive is identified as a major thoroughfare on Cary's transportation plan, and Farm Pond Road is identified as a proposed collector roadway. Therefore, a 50-foot streetscape would be required along Davis Drive and a 30-foot streetscape along Farm Pond Road with future development. At this time, I'd like to ask the applicant to come forward and identify any points that I may have missed in this presentation, and then following the applicant's comments, I'll be available for your questions.
Good evening, board members. My name is Adam Ashbaugh. I'm with L-Star Management here in Raleigh. As Deborah mentioned, this project does have a little bit of history behind it. As you may recall, the prior rezoning application was for a TR zoning, a transitional residential zoning, with much smaller lot sizes. We heard the concerns from this board, from town council, and from the adjacent property owners, and we're here to let you know that we listened, and the proposal before you today really incorporates a lot of those concerns and issues that were brought up. As Deborah mentioned, and you saw on the slides, some of the concerns that were raised were the lack of transition from not only on the Farm Pond side, but also on the Stonecrest development to the north. The incompatibility from Farm Pond Road, the density, and potential traffic issues. So what we've done in the modified plan that we've created, we think reflects really a response to those concerns and comments that we heard. We've changed the base zoning from TR to R8 conditional use, which again is consistent with the Stonecrest neighborhood to the north. We've added a condition for the larger lots adjacent to Farm Pond Road, a minimum of 20,000 square foot lots, which is consistent with the covenants and restrictions within that development. We also are compatible with the comprehensive plan and the vision for this area. We've limited our density to 2 dwelling units to the acre. And as far as the transportation aspect goes, we feel like, and we've heard concerns from the Farm Pond residents that there's a site distance issue as they come out onto Davis Drive. And we feel, as we work through the site plan component of this project, that we'll be able to provide a much safer connection to Davis Drive at the tangent piece there that's a little further to the north, and will provide a much safer access out to Davis Drive, not only for our residents, but also an opportunity for Farm Pond residents to come in, use our neighborhood streets, and come out to Davis Drive at a safer location. So with that, we believe that with this rezoning request, we've met the criteria for consideration in reviewing rezonings. The town and other service providers can provide sufficient public safety and services to the subject property. This request is now unlikely to have significant adverse impacts on the natural environment, will not have significant adverse impacts on property in the vicinity of the subject tract, and the proposed zoning classification with the conditions that we've offered is suitable for the subject property. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. With that, I'm going to open up the discussion for questions. Do we have them?
I have one.
I think Mr. Miller got in first.
Yeah, he did. Go ahead.
Ms. Grennan, the zoning condition 3 regarding the minimum 20-foot wide perimeter buffer along the western and northern property lines, how does that relate to the ordinance requirement? Is that above and beyond? Is that?
A buffer would not be required between two Class 2 land uses. Anytime you have lots that are 8,000 square feet in size or larger, that would be a Class 2 to a Class 2. And what is required per the LDO is a landscape area that could be within a lot. It would be a 20-foot width and planted to a Type B standard, but it's difficult to enforce because it's not in common open space. So this would exceed the LDO standards by being a buffer in common open space.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I have several. We watched I think probably all of us have seen the public hearing that was held before the council on this. And would note that there were 5 people, which I believe is slightly more than about a majority, close to a majority, if maybe more, of the residents on Farm Pond Road spoke against the project. None spoke in favor of it. One of the things that was pointed out, among other things, was possibility that of purchase of it, of some or all of this property. There was some interest in the residents of Farm Pond Road on that in order to preserve their way of life. Now, we're not here and we can't get involved in anything like that, so we're certainly not here to broker any dealing on land purchases. But can you comment, this would be for the applicant, can you comment on that? Has anything progressed, or has there been any negotiations?
Yes, I can comment on that. And in fact, Mr. Howell, the owner of the property, is here tonight if you have questions for him as well. I spoke with his broker, Tom Calhoun, today, and no contact by these Farm Pond residents has been made to him. He offered, we offered at that time, hey, if you want to reach out, if you're really serious about purchasing the property, please contact Gary Howell's broker. And from that point to today at 1 o'clock when I talked to Tom, they had not contacted him. So I'm not sure that, I won't speak for them, but I'm not sure that an offer is really serious coming from them.
Now, the 20,000 square feet, approximately half acre, minimum lot size, that would apply only to the lots on the western edge. It would not apply to the lots that are adjacent to Farm Pond Road.
It would apply to any lot that, a portion of which falls within 50 feet of this boundary line. So, yes, if there
So
were a
just-
lot, if there were a lot on Farm Pond Road that no portion of the lot was in that 50 feet, it would not be subject to that 20,000 square foot rule. If there was a lot at the corner here, that would not be subject. It could be larger than 8,000 square feet, but it
But it
wouldn't
could
have to
be
be.
8,000 square
Correct,
feet.
correct. 8,000 square feet or larger.
Now, one of the objections that has been raised to this is possibility of opening up a road onto Farm Pond Road and where traffic would come out onto Farm Pond Road and then turn and go onto Davis, adding to the problems on Farm Pond Road. Is there any way that they can keep from having a connection?
That is not something appropriate to consider with a rezoning. We're looking at the use of the land, and the connectivity would be addressed at the time of site plan. Connectivity requirement is an expectation that we would look at the time of site plan. But if there was a reason why the applicant wanted to ask for a waiver to that, that would have to go through a quasi-judicial public hearing before town council.
Would the applicant have to ask for the waiver, or could that waiver be asked for by other people, such as the residents of Farm Pond Road?
It's really a site plan issue. Actually, no, the applicants, they could, yes, the applicant would have to ask for that. Yes. But again, would be at the time of site plan.
Now, I believe the average or the median size of lots currently existing on Farm Pond Road is about 4 acres. Is that correct, or is it me? What is for the to the north?
It's a minimum lot size of 8,000 square feet, and there's a range between 8 and 10.
Okay.
This neighborhood here.
I think that's all the questions I have.
Other questions?
I have one.
Okay, Mr. Rogers.
Is there any type of time plan for the extension of Howell Road to connect to Farm Pond?
I'm going to ask Mr. Jensen from our engineering staff to speak to that if he has any more information.
Would that be contingent upon further development of the property to the west?
Generally, those local collector roads, minor collectors, are generally formulated by development as it occurs in that area, but we haven't had any interest in that corridor right now.
Okay, thank you.
Before you leave. Okay, you say generally. Is it possible for it to be turned into a collector road without development, or would that be contingent only upon development?
Well, if someone came in today to develop the property, we would make them be in compliance with our comprehensive plan, which shows it to be a collector road. So we would ask them to build it to that particular standard along their frontage. Other than that, again, the town doesn't have anything in our capital improvement plan in the next 10 years to do anything to that particular road. So it's generally going to, if it ever gets widened or improved, it's probably going to be done by land, development projects in that corridor. So.
Okay.
Other questions?
Just one. The property immediately to the west is zoned R40 Wake County?
Correct.
Thank you.
Seeing no more questions, can we have a motion, please?
I'll make a motion. I move that the board forward case number 13 REZ 14 to Town Council with a recommendation for approval, as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all the other applicable plans, and is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons set forth in the staff report and presentation.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman, the reason I'm moving for approval is the fact that I remember this case well when it was presented before us last December, and I know that there were a number of citizens that were concerned about the size of the lots and disturbing the nature of their own homes and residences in that area. But having said that, the developer has come back with what I consider some very reasonable compromises. A reduction from 43 to 28 lots, 2 lots per acre, the 50-foot buffer, ensuring that larger lots will border the lots to the west, the fact that the residents in the, was it Stone Ledge or Stone?
Stone Crest is to the north here.
To the north. There's been some approval from those residents, and for those reasons, I think that it's a proper use of the land and is within the land use plan.
Other comments?
Well, my second is a ditto to Mr. Warner's comments. I do think that I was one of the people that voted against this back in 2012, and I think this is a reasonable compromise.
Well, I will say that I do appreciate the effort by the developer to somewhat to compromise and reduce the intensity of this. However, I believe that it's still a problem. Farm Pond Road, getting from Farm Pond Road out onto Davis is a problem as it stands right now. And I've experienced it myself. I've driven a number of times, particularly a year ago with the previous case, and more recently than that with this. Looking at it, it's still definitely a problem. It's maybe less of a problem with the reduction, but still a problem, too much of a problem. Further, going from 8,000 square feet to the 4 acres median that's on Farm Pond Road, it's like something over 4 acres, I think is too much of a difference, and is particularly if a connection is made to Farm Pond Road for the connectivity, I think that would sort of tie this neighborhood in. It would be too much of a change on the Farm Pond Road to have these small lots next to the very large lots that are on Farm Pond Road, and the type of lifestyle that they expressed at the last public hearing for the council, as well as the one that public hearings over a year ago. So for that reason, I'm going to oppose this.
Other comments?
I'll say quickly, I will echo Mr. Rogers and Mr. Werner's comments in general. I was very torn on this one the first time it came before us. I think the accommodations are reasonable. In particular, the density reduction is significant, and the larger lots adjacent to where there are larger lots, I think go a long way toward addressing the concerns. Certainly you can't address all the concerns. This is a balancing act. It always is. I think this is a reasonable balance between the property owner's rights and the rights of the neighbors in the community. So I'll support the motion.
Thank you. Others?
Seems like we're kind of heading down the line. I agree, reasonable accommodations have been made in my eyes. And one thing that was brought up that, again, is the tough task we have, because there's legitimate questions on connectivity that is not the purview of this board. So that's just something to be extra vigilant on down the road, I think, because connectivity to this area is important and has to be handled delicately. But as far as a zoning issue, I can support the motion.
Well, I might as well pipe in too. I agree. I think that connectivity is going to be an issue, but I think that the applicant has made significant or changes, so I'll support it.
Mr. Evangelista, I mean,
I wasn't here for the first one of these, but I can't see any reason to find fault with anything Mr. Warner says, so I'll comply or agree as well.
well, one of the advantages of being last is I can say yes. With that, I'll call the vote. All those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay, so that motion carries 7-1. We'll move on to our next case, which is 13 REZ 11, Cary Park PDD Amendment. Ms. Bierman?
This is a public hearing on a request to rezone about 1.85 acres located at the northeast corner of Green Level Church Road and McCrimmon Parkway. This is the vicinity map. You can see the Ridgefield Farm subdivision to the north, Waycroft to the west, and the Hamden townhomes in this area. This is a closer aerial view of the site. The existing and proposed zoning is Planned Development District. The property is identified as tract SF10 in the Cary Park PDD. Currently, the land use on this tract is limited to 4 detached dwellings. The applicant proposes to add a daycare facility as an alternate use, and that with the maximum size of 10,600 square feet. Also, the applicant proposes averaging of the 30-foot streetscape currently required along McCrimmon Parkway by providing a minimum width of 20 feet with the average width of 30 feet. No traffic mitigations were required under the current zoning. No traffic study was required. The applicant proposes a right-in, right-out access point on McCrimmon Parkway and an eastbound left turn lane on McCrimmon at Cary Glen Boulevard to accommodate U-turns, and these are improvements that would be included as a requirement of the Planned Development District. The land use plan designation is LDR. According to Cary's GIS maps, a small portion of the southeast corner of the site is impacted by a stream buffer. Field determination of this would be made at the time of site plan approval. This shows existing and proposed greenways in the area. A street side trail would be required along Green Level Church Road at the time of the site plan review. This Cary Transportation Plan shows that both Green Level Church Road and McCrimmon Parkway are designated as major thoroughfares adjacent to the site. And there is a future C-Trans fixed route along Green Level Church Road. There were no speakers at the public hearing and no protest petition was submitted. That concludes staff's comments, and I would ask if the applicant wishes to come up and add any comments. And after that, I'll be available for questions.
Thank you.
Good evening, board members. My name is Lee Perry. I'm with East West Partners, based over in Chapel Hill. We were the original master developers of Cary Park. This is one of the last remaining parcels in the master plan. It was zoned as low-density residential, which, as Mary mentioned, we're not proposing changing, just adding the daycare use sitting on the corner of Green Level and McCrimmon. We don't believe that it really has much viability as a residential parcel, especially when you talk about the multiple driveway connections and houses kind of right there on that main corner. We think this is a very appropriate use for the site. As Mary mentioned, we had no opposition at the public hearing. We had the neighborhood meeting and had no real concerns with the neighbors and feel like we've addressed, any issues really none that came up. So we appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. At this point, we'll open this case up for questions and discussion from the board.
I have a question. Just from a matter of terms, because I've heard the term rezoning but then reading in the staff report, expanding the land use to allow the daycare, would add daycare to the permitted use. I'm just trying to wrap my head around, are we just expanding the definition here, or are we rezoning something?
It is a rezoning. The zoning district is a planned development district. In Cary, that is an actual zoning district, so the name of the zoning district isn't changing. It's still planned development district major. However, within that, the specific Cary Park planned development district, the master plan for the PDD refers to the individual tracts and lists within that document the uses that are allowed in each tract. So this is a modification to uses that are allowed within this particular tract, but it is technically a rezoning because the way that PDD changes is through the rezoning process.
Okay. Confusing, but I get it. So, thank you.
Other questions? Mr. Miller.
This adds the additional use, as was pointed out, of the daycare center, and just to confirm the conditions of the traffic improvement, the roadway improvements and streetscape buffer would be required whether it developed as residential or with the new use, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
So they would still have the option of developing it if somehow the daycare center fell through. They would have the option to continue to develop it with 4 detached dwellings, or they would be a daycare center.
That's correct.
One more. So what if the daycare center closes in 3 years? What can the building be used for?
Another daycare center.
And that's it?
That's it. If, for any other use, if
They'd
that
have to-
occurred and there was some other user that could use that business, that building for different use, unless it was, well, they would have to come back through another rezoning
Okay.
to change the use again.
Okay, thanks.
Seeing no more questions, I'm going to ask for a motion from someone.
I'll make a motion. I move that we forward case number 13 REZ 11, the Cary Park SF10 PDD amendment to Town Council with a recommendation for approval as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans and is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons set forth in the staff report and presentation.
And I'll second.
Motion and a second discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries unanimously. We will move on to our next case, which is 13 REZ 15, the Cornerstone Presbyterian Church. Ms. Bierman.
This is a request to rezone about 13.49 acres located at 2220 High House Road. This is a vicinity map. You can see High House Road to the south, the railroad tracks to the east, and the Berkeley subdivision to the west and north. This is a closer view of the site. There is an existing church, Cornerstone Presbyterian Church, that is currently located on the site. The church contains about 4,800 square feet of floor area. There's a parking lot with 100 parking spaces. And then you can see connected with the parking lot is a cul-de-sac that forms the terminus of Citrus Place to the west, which goes through the Berkeley subdivision. The existing zoning for the site is residential 40, R40. Allowable uses in R40 include certain low-density residential uses and limited non-residential uses that support residential use. Religious assembly was allowed by right in the R40 district when the existing facility was approved in 2003. Under current regulations, a special use permit is now required for a religious assembly in the R40 district or where the parcel size is less than 20 acres. So although the facility that's there now was constructed as permitted by right under the ordinance at the time, expansion of the church now requires a special use permit. The proposed zoning of the site is office institutional conditional use. The proposed zoning conditions are There are two. One, to limit the uses, the use on the site to residential assembly and any accessory uses that go with that. And if there are any future accessory school or daycare uses on the site as a result of any expansion, then that would be limited to 40 students. This shows the land use plan. The plan designation is LDR, low density residential. Religious assembly is consistent with this designation. According to Cary's GIS maps, a portion of the site is impacted by stream buffers. The field determination is required at the time of site plan review. It shows the Cary Parks and Greenways plan. There are no greenway facilities impacting the site. High House Road is a major thoroughfare. Along the frontage of the site, it's a 4-lane median divided segment. There is a C-Tran fixed route along High House Road, and at the time of the site plan approval, an 8x18 easement for a transit stop would be required, located in approximately this area. This is a notification map that shows properties notified of the public hearing. There is a valid protest petition. You can see the parcels in yellow are the eligible parcels related to the protest. There were a number of neighborhood concerns expressed in the protest petition and also discussed at a meeting held by the applicant with the neighbors, and that meeting was also attended by the mayor and council members Adcock and Urha on October 22nd. And staff attended that meeting as well. There were general concerns expressed because if the rezoning is approved, the church expansion would be permitted by right as opposed to with the special use permit as is currently required. So that was one of the procedural changes or process changes that comes about as a result of this rezoning request. The other specific concerns related to the site include issues related with stormwater runoff, the traffic impact on the adjacent neighborhood, questions about the width of the buffer, the impact of the existing parking lot and connections on the adjacent properties, and the effect on residential property values in the area. And with that, I would call on the applicant to see if there are any additional comments that they would like to make.
Good evening. I'm Brenda Carroll. I am a member of Cornerstone and an elder there. With me tonight are our pastor, Dr. Thrower, and the head of the building committee, as well as our clerk of session. We've got a packet of information that I'd like to share with you, and I will make this as brief as I can, but I do think that it's important that you have some sense. Can I? Thank you very much. Yes, there's enough there. First and foremost, we want to make sure that you understand the request and the reason behind it. We purchased this parcel many years ago, and it was 13 acres that was actually not even part of the town. We requested rezoning. We requested annexation into the town of Cary. And at that time, R40 was the appropriate zoning for that. That was taken care of. When the town changed to the LDO in 2003, which ironically was the same year we did our initial building, that really put a burden on us for future growth, as far as it put us in a position that we would have to go through a quasi-judicial hearing for anything that we do every time there's any addition to a church. And I'm sure you're very much aware, you know, with the church property, you start out small, and as the congregation grows, that's what you do with the building. So you take on a big nut at the beginning with this large parcel of land with the anticipation of the future. We're no different than any other organization in doing that. So now the idea that as we get ready and have spent 3 years raising funds to do the the first addition onto our church, that every time we would have to do this under the rezoning, under this LDO, we would basically have to beg for the right and negotiate with our neighbors for just the right to even start the process and go to the possibility. So that's something that we really wanted to make sure that you understood, that we're not asking for rules to be changed. They were kind of changed because the system needed it, but now we're kind of stuck with it. So that's where we're at. There were a couple things that on the protest petition we really felt needed to be addressed. We consider ourselves to be extremely good neighbors. When I know some of you were there at the town council meeting, and afterwards we spent some time with the neighbors that had protested and done a petition against us. To clarify, there's only 6.15% of those that are around us. It's only 3 homeowners right now that make up this protest petition that makes it very difficult for us. Out of the 4 that originally were on that protest petition, we worked very hard, and in what I gave you, there are things that we've tried to do. From some of their complaints and some of their concerns was their distrust of the town, and they were worried about all of this. Well, part of what I gave you there was also information on what was given out to the public originally. What you received has a very nice description as far as in regards to the setbacks and things like that. That was not on what was originally given out. And we felt bad even for our own neighbors because of their misperception that by rezoning, it was going to take away any requirements of us to do any setbacks. From the get-go, we had agreed to keep. And so on what Mary provided you tonight, at the bottom of it, you'll see the asterisks there. On what they received, they did not have the asterisks. I'm looking at the consistency with land development ordinance, where it says side yard setbacks and rear yard setbacks. The piece that I provided to you is what the residents, what our neighbors received, and it scared them tremendously. So we've been kind of backpedaling with some of their fears and some of their misunderstandings. We organized a meeting and invited the mayor and 2 council persons to it, as well as Ms. Bierman, to try to make sure that we really did try to address it. I think that the part that made it very difficult is I personally went and knocked on doors and tried to do a face-to-face with each one. Our pastor has made phone calls with them as well. One of the neighbors actually, once they understood, withdrew their petition without any problem at all. One of our other neighbors, though, actually told the pastor and I that if we would agree to a buffer that was going to be over 80 feet, that they'd remove their name from the petition. And it was like, you know what? We want to be fair. We want to do what's right. But that's kind of like holding us hostage for something, and it didn't feel good. You know, it really was difficult for us. With all of that being said, we've kind of been at peace with leaving this alone and letting things flow with these 3 petitioners there. But at the same time, we're still trying diligently to address anything that we think is a legitimate concern. For one, you have in your packet from our architect the fact that it's been discussed. George and the building committee have been diligent in making sure that the discussion is there about drainage and all of those kind of things. The town has more stringent rules in regards to runoff and those types of things as well. This will be addressed properly during site plan and everything, but we're dedicated to that as well. They addressed the issue of of values. There were some real concerns by them that if we were zoned O&I, that even though we have limited ourselves to religious assembly, that O&I, just the fact that it was O&I, was going to diminish their value. You have in your packet from a very well-respected local appraiser, Stacy Infinson. He's done many evaluations over the years. It does not affect it at all. As a matter of fact, being near a church like that with the 40-foot buffer that you have there and the openness, it's usually considered quite a positive. We also have discussed with Jerry Jensen, the possibility of getting together with DOT. We've talked a lot about different ideas. Right now, one of the traffic issues is the fact that it's connectivity. I mean, you know, we know that that is what Cary has, and it needs to be there. We can't change that, and we can't be held hostage of not being able to use our land because they don't like the fact that it's connectivity. But to look at possible solutions that might work for everyone down the road, you know, there is actually a median there that we would propose be looked at by DOT to open it up, like in front of the Cornerstone Shopping Center down the street, where it would be a left turn only. Whether it's that, whether it's other things that are possible, we're looking at trying to set up with Jerry a meeting with DOT in January and invite the presidents or a representative from Wellesley's Homeowner Association that's across the street, as well as Berkeley's Homeowner Association, to meet us and put our heads together and try to come up with some ideas. I guess I don't mean to be long-winded, but it's important to us that you understand that we do feel that this is a reasonable request. We are very saddened by the fact there's still a petition there. But at the same time, we want to be good stewards. We want to do right by the community, but we don't want to be held hostage. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
Yes. Ms. Bierman, there's no zoning restriction that limits the amount of building that could be placed on this area, other than, of course, the physical limits of the amount of land they owned. Is that correct?
That's correct. The zoning conditions don't include a specific square footage limitation. They would just be subject to all of the requirements of the LDO at the time of the site plan.
Mm-hmm. So subject to those requirements, they could build as big a building as they wanted.
They could expand, yes.
Mm-hmm. They are limited to 40 children, not a square foot limit, but number of children limit if they have daycare or school.
Correct. That was a limitation with in looking at the traffic requirements and the requirements for traffic studies because the expansion of the facility itself is typically with off-peak, with the off-peak hours would not generate the traffic study. However, in looking at the potential for school or daycare use, that could, that's the threshold is there related to those accessory uses because those hours would not be like more on the Sunday times when it was outside of the peak hours, right?
Mm-hmm. How much traffic would typically be generated by a daycare or a school with 40 children?
I would ask Mr. Jensen to respond to that.
Is there an official number?
I think that's...
Because I have my guess, but...
I'm not saying there's an official number, but it's generally, I think we asked them to put a cap on 40 students because that then's bumping up on our LDO requirement where you have to do a traffic study if it exceeds 100 peak hour trips. So it's the 40 would be probably equivalent, along with some of the church operations that they would have it would be around 40 trips would keep them under that 100 trip threshold. And again, a trip is, 100 trips would be both in and out, so
Right.
roughly, you know.
So 40 people going in to drop the kid off.
Yeah, and then it's circling
40
back out and
going
coming back out. Yeah. Plus there's, you know, teachers and everything else that go along with that. So we work with them to make sure that they want to stay under that cap so they didn't have to do a traffic study.
Now, I think the applicant wanted to comment on that too.
If you don't mind, I just wanted to mention that our intention has never been to have a daycare, but in order to make sure that we also accommodate, whether it's the Brownies that meet their Girl Scouts or any other organization, or if we ever wound up doing anything where, you know, like our Vacation Bible School or anything else, it just kind of fit.
Yeah.
So there was never any intention of, oh, we want a school. It was part of that.
So while it's not planned right now, we would be assuming that they or some other owner, if they decide to move, would have a school there with up to 40 children. It's consideration.
Because it's the rezoning, and the only restrictions that we can place on that at the time when the site plan comes in are the limitations included with the zoning conditions, even though there may not be an intent to do that now. If the property is sold in the future, or if those plans change in the future without that limitation, changes could be made so that there could be a larger number of students, unless there's a zoning condition that specifically limits that, because that's the only thing we can enforce. So that's why when the request came about, and in terms of looking at traffic issues and whether or not a traffic study was required, the only way to ensure that that traffic won't be greater and that the students won't be greater is to place that as a condition, which the applicant volunteered to do.
Okay. Then on a different subject altogether, can you show us the map that you showed before? I didn't catch the slide number, showing the protest petitions. Oh, okay, so the one on Carpenter Upchurch is invalid and not one of the three.
That's correct. The railroad is in between the property line and that parcel, so that rendered that particular protest, or that particular parcel, invalid for the protest.
Good. Okay, thank you. As far as the traffic, is it possible to make a left turn out of the church property as it stands now? Is there a median there that would?
There is a median. It's right in, right out into the church now, because there is the median at this location. In going through, there's the terminus of the cul-de-sac here, and in coming through the neighborhood, you can come out to this point and make a turn in either direction.
Now, there were several concerns which I don't really know that were particularly valid, but one that really opened my mind when I drove through there during the middle of a rainstorm recently is the runoff. I presume that that is an issue that will be faced with the site plan review.
When the initial site plan was done, there was, my understanding is there was a heavy rain event that occurred during the construction process, and as a result of that, there was some flooding on the adjacent property. That situation was corrected, and also I would point out that the stormwater regulations that we have in place now are more stringent than those that were in effect at the time. And my understanding is that there haven't been the stormwater issues since that initial event that occurred during the church's construction.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Other questions, Ms. Besser?
Just for clarification, so the church is wanting to expand the property, or rezone the property. If there's more than 40 children, will they have to come back through rezoning again?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Miller?
And a couple of clarifications. If the property isn't rezoned, the current alternative is a special use permit, quasi-judicial hearing.
That's correct.
And if I understood correctly, there was at least a request or some talk for about an 80-foot buffer. I believe it would be on the western side. And the requirement, if I read the staff report correctly, is 40 feet
That's
between
correct.
those uses. Okay.
Mr. Evangelista?
I'm just trying to get a handle on the zoning itself. R40 with religious assembly, how common is that for churches, or are more churches going to O&I or zone that way from the get-go?
The way that our ordinance is, I mean, churches are allowed in R40. It's, even though it's not a residential use, it supports residential use, so that is very common. In the way that our ordinance reads now, the difference between the use being allowed by right versus a special use now has an acreage component. So if this parcel was 20 acres instead of approximately 13 acres, then the church could expand and there would not be an issue. They would be able to expand by right through the site plan approval process, as was previously the case before the change to the ordinance. So it's based on the size of the property.
Other questions? Mr. Warner?
Just one quick question. Have they offered a plan as to what they would like to do in terms of expansion?
No, one of the concerns is, as I understand, is there's not a specific plan for expansion at this point. I think, and in doing the special use permit, it is necessary to have a plan so that you know exactly what you're getting a special use permit for. And I think I have never seen a specific plan that's been submitted, and I'm not aware of any plan of what the ultimate build-out of the church might be. I don't know that exists at this point, but certainly any expansion at this point, even a very small one, would require the special use permit approval. And if any interim step of, an expansion without knowing the full, the full build out of the site, every step would also require a special use permit. Since there is the requirement, unlike the rezoning, the special use permit process does require the specific plan to know exactly the square footage and what's being requested.
Let me ask a follow-up. If the rezoning is approved, they would have the authority and right to expand as many structures as they deem appropriate for their congregation?
Within the limits of meeting all of the requirements of the land development ordinance.
And does that land development ordinance currently limit the amount of square footage?
There's not a specific square footage limit, but there becomes, a practical limit, I think, because you've got buffer requirements, stormwater requirements, parking requirements, all of those for any site. All of those things balance out to the site development process. But there are the buffer requirements, and which there are stream buffers on the sites, perimeter buffers, and there would be storm pond requirements, all the stormwater requirements in order to address the specific design the specific amount of impervious surface, for example, that would be presented with the site plan. And without seeing a specific plan, there's no way to say exactly what those requirements would be, because they're based on the extent of development on the site.
Are the requirements for parking a condition of the square footage or how many parishioners they have
Yes,
in their church?
it's based on the number of seats in the sanctuary, the largest area. So it's based on the occupancy and the number of seats, I believe.
Thank you.
There's a ratio.
Mr. Evangelista.
If this is rezoned office and industrial with these conditions, and the property is acquired by someone else, they're limited to school, no more than 40, plus religious assembly use, unless they come back here and apply for a rezoning.
That is correct.
How broadly do we define religious assembly? Is it a church per se and nothing more, or could there be a use that comes in there, and I'm just thinking theoretically, under religious assembly that would satisfy these requirements that wouldn't necessarily be a church?
Well, I mean, we do have a specific definition in our ordinance related to religious assembly. It doesn't, I mean, there would be a number of, denominations, different religions that could, that would fall under that definition. But it's still basically assembly for religious purposes.
Other questions?
On the buffers, I'm reading in your notes, the 30-foot, the 40-foot and the 30-foot buffer, that this is based on the use of the property and not on the zoning?
That's correct.
So if this was R40 and it was 20 acres, so they had the ability to expand their church by right, those setbacks would be the same as they are now, the 40 and the 30?
The buffers would be the same.
Buffers, yeah, not setbacks.
Some of the confusion that I think occurred before was related to terminology. The setbacks would be different.
Sure.
But the buffers are, in looking at the site as a religious assembly use, the buffers are actually greater than they would be if the site was developed for residential use.
Okay.
Because the buffers are based on use independent of the zoning.
Sure, so if this was 20 acres and they had the right to expand, just go to site plan and expand, their buffers are the exact same as essentially what they're asking for now in the rezoning, because it goes by the use of the religious institution up to residential. Okay, thank you.
Seeing no more questions, do we have a motion?
Yes. I move that the board forward case number 15, number 13, REZ 15, to Town Council with a recommendation for approval as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans and is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons set forth in the staff report and presentation.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have 2 seconds. I'm going to say Mr. Warner got the bell here. Discussion.
Since I made the motion, I had sort of mixed feelings, basically in favor of this. Somewhat disappointed that the applicant did not add on any additional conditions to help satisfy the neighbors. I think that perhaps they have plenty of room on this site, and so they could have easily had a wider buffer. I hope that when they actually plan and go with the site plan, they will allow plenty of room around the perimeter of their property, that, perimeter backing up to residential property, not necessarily including the railroad tracks. But it looks like there's plenty of room to expand and have a large amount of land between them and the residences. And I would have preferred that be part of the condition. One of the things we always look at here is not just the particular applicant, but if we change the zoning and some years in the future they move somewhere else and somebody else acquires this property, of course, we would still have to respect any of the conditions made, but it might be a totally different group of people. So I would like to have seen that. I did, as I mentioned, I did drive around the property and around the neighborhood during a rainstorm. I know one of the biggest concerns, of the valid concerns that had been expressed, was stormwater. And while there is a tremendous drop-off, a lot bigger than I realized and a lot more than the aerial photo would lead you to believe, a drop-off towards the back, I really did not see that there was it was not apparent that there was a significant runoff problem like some that I have seen around town. There may be some problem, but I trust that would be taken care of with the site plan review. There were a lot of things expressed at the public hearing which I don't think were relevant, things to do with trusting the town and things like that that were not particularly relevant. A lot of things that would apply, particularly including the runoff issues, that would apply whether or not the church is expanded, but didn't really have anything to do with the expansion. And this also, a key thing is this really is a matter of whether we require a special use permit with hearing, the quasi-judicial hearing for the expansion, or whether we do a zoning. I think for both sides, a rezoning is far preferable than having to go through the hearing process. There were, I believe, 10 speakers at the public hearing that the council had, some of whom would probably have been able to speak at a quasi-judicial hearing, some of whom were not nearby, not directly affected, probably would not have been able to. So I think from all respects, for both sides, a rezoning is better than a special use permit. And so for those reasons, I will support this, and I did make the motion.
Other comments?
John?
Mr. Warner?
Mr. Chairman, the reason I seconded it, I was concerned when I went out and looked at the property. One of the things that we're constantly looking at to ensure that there's a proper transition in rezonings. And obviously here we have a single-family home community to the west, and now we have what all practical purposes is a commercial property. And that bothers me somewhat, but I think the larger issue in my eyes is the fact that we have to give a landowner proper authority to develop their land in a responsible way. And there hardly is any other way to go about this than to rezone it. And again, I agree with John with respect to the special use permit would be overly burdensome to the owners of the land. And so for those reasons, I support the motion.
Other comments?
I can definitely see both sides here. I think the applicant has legitimate expectations. I think the neighbors have valid concerns. I also agree that a rezoning is preferable to having to go through what could be a series of special use permits. On the other hand, with this rezoning, I think there's more opportunity that could have been pursued to give more comfort to the neighbors. Maybe an 80-foot buffer isn't the right thing, but between 40 and 80, maybe 60 or 50 or 70 could have been pursued. Maybe the traffic thing that the applicant spoke about, meeting with DOT to look at traffic concerns. I think that's something that could be pursued, and I would prefer that those be in here as zoning conditions. I have no reason to doubt the intent of the applicant. I think they're genuine, and in fact, I completely believe what their intent is. I think there's more opportunity here that it could have been encoded in the rezoning as conditions. Things about traffic, things about buffers, some of the concerns. I will echo, I think that there's some comfort in the stormwater management plan. I think if you look into and understand Cary's stormwater ordinance, the applicant will be required to maintain all stormwater on site with anything they do. But I think there's more comfort we could have given to the neighbors here by some additional zoning conditions that I think match the intent. So I think what I'm saying is I would really prefer in the rezoning to see that intent expressed in written zoning conditions, because as has been pointed out, although this applicant has the right intent and I'm sure is a good neighbor and will continue to do that, we really have to look at what's written in front of us and consider the fact that it could be someone else somewhere down the road. And so for that reason, although I can see both sides, I would really rather see this written down as conditions, and so I'll take that into account.
Other comments?
Yeah, just to go back in the history of this from the staff report, I understand that in 2003, the site plan for this was approved, and then the UDO changed to the LDO and essentially put that approved site plan in a non-conforming use type of scenario. So they would have to come and have special use to expand. Whereas when they came forward years ago, they were under the assumption that they were conforming, they could do this and more. And in order to, I know council has asked for more rationale in our thought process. Under the LDO, section 341E, section number 1, criteria for rezoning, the proposed rezoning corrects an error or meets the challenge of some changing condition. I see this as 10 years too late to a changing condition. This church came in, they in good faith went for a zoning or a site plan, it was approved, and they had conditions changed upon them. So I'm going to vote in favor of this because this is 10 years too late correcting a changing condition.
Well, I'm going to punctuate what you just said since no one else seems to want to say anymore. These guys did the right thing. They bought a parcel of land that was big enough to support their expansion. They came in and did everything right by the town to support their plan. They were, good, diligent property owners making plans for the future, and then we changed the rules. And so now they're in a predicament because we changed the rules, and I'm not sure that's right. And so I'm going to support the motion because I think we ought to do what's right. And seeing no one else wanting to say anything, I'm going to call this for a vote. All those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
I'll say no for the reasons I stated.
Okay, so we have, that motion passes 7-1. And we're going to move on to our next case, which is REZ, 13 REZ 17, the Meacham property at Cary Park PDD, or PDP, excuse me. Ms. Behrman, working you hard tonight.
Okay, this is a request to rezone about 15 acres at the northeast corner of Green Level, Church Road, and Carpenter Fire Station Road. You can see here the vicinity map, Camden Park in this area, and the Cary Park Town Center down to the south. This is a closer aerial view. You can see there's an existing residence located on the property at the corner. The current zoning of this site is R40. This property is not within a planned development district, but there are several PDDs in the area, so this is just a map to kind of show the context of that in the vicinity. The proposed zoning is MXD, Mixed Use District. And as you know, Mixed Use District zoning cases do include a preliminary development plan, which is shown here. The key features of this PDP include limit to commercial use. There are 5 development parcels shown that would include a total of 5 to 8 buildings. maximum total of 85,000 square feet of floor area, and the applicant is not requesting any modifications to development standards. There is one site design issue I would like to point out, and this relates to the location of parking areas. The LDO requires that at the intersection of thoroughfares and/or collectors, that there be parking between the street and the building only when the building, or only when the elevation of the building is down at least 10 feet below the street, to take into account topographic concerns that may exist. Otherwise, we do have a requirement at these intersections for the buildings to be brought up to the street. And this is just an example of compliance with that at the southeast corner of Tryon Road and Walnut Street, where you see the building there that's up at the street without the parking in between. On development parcel A for the proposed development, which is at the intersection of collector, or intersection of thoroughfares, the existing grade at the building location shown for this area is currently above the grade of the road. And in order to site the building in this location, the applicant would need to grade the site to lower the building and the grades to 10 feet below the road level. This, here are a couple of photographs. You can see the view of the site as it exists now from Carpenter Fire Station Road and Green Level Church Road, just to get the relative grades of the site in relation to the road on this issue. Because the location of the parking area as shown on track day on the preliminary development plan does not currently comply with section 7.8.2G based on these current grades. And lowering the floor elevation of the building to enable parking between the building and the street, we think would be inconsistent with the intent of section 8.2. And we bring this up now because by showing this on the preliminary development plan, this would be presuming that at the time of the site plan, those grades would be lowered. This shows the Cary land use plan. The plan designation for the site is commercial. There are stream buffers shown on the site per the Cary GIS maps. There's also an area to the north, portion of the north, that actually has some floodplain area related to Morris Branch. According to the Cary Parks and Greenways plan, there would be a street side trail shown along Green Level Church Road. Cary Transportation Plan shows that both Green Level Church Road and Carpenter Fire Station Road are designated as major thoroughfares. A traffic study was prepared for the property, or for the request. And there are several traffic mitigations offered by the applicant. These include payment in lieu of a traffic signal at Carpenter Fire Station Road and Cary Glen Boulevard, installation of a traffic signal at the north access point on Green Level Church Road, various turn lanes on Green Level Church Road, and a leftover access on Carpenter Fire Station. There is a possible future C-Tran fixed route along Green Level Church Road. We have not received any citizen concerns or calls related to this project. There was no protest petition, and there were no speakers at the public hearing. This concludes staff comments. I'd call on the applicant to provide any additional information that will be available for questions.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Board. Glenda Topp with Glenda Topp and Associates. I'm here tonight representing the Meachams. As Mary pointed out, we are in a mixed-use overlay district. We have submitted a preliminary development plan. We're in compliance with the land use plan that was changed prior to the rezoning being submitted for commercial. We've met on a number of occasions with the neighbors, and as you could see from the comments on the slide, there were no phone calls, there were no citizens at the meetings. They are very pleased with the plan that we've proposed. They are very happy with the access points, both pedestrian and vehicular. We believe that we have met the town's design guidelines and that we are not asking for any reductions to the plan. And when we submit our site plan, we will continue to be in compliance with the town's ordinance. I am here to answer questions, but also want to add that the site designer is here to answer questions, as is Bob Brett with the company that is looking to develop the site. And lastly, the owner of the property here is here also. So we're all here to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. So do we have any questions?
Yes, can you put up slide 103? Okay. A legal question. Is this like a condition on the rezoning that similar to that in that it has to be followed with the rezoning, or is this just something that can be changed?
The preliminary development plan is a component of the rezoning request.
Okay, so that will run with the land just as if it were a zoning condition?
Yes.
Okay.
I think, and I'll ask Ms. Bierman to clarify if I'm incorrect, but it's my understanding the applicant has not asked for any reduction from our standards if you're concerned about the corner building and the parking issue.
Yeah.
They haven't asked for a reduction from our standards, so they're expected to meet our standard. Right now, our standard is that the building has to be at the corner unless there's that 10-foot drop in grade. So as rendered, they can only build it that way if there is that 10-foot drop in grade.
And other than that, they would have to maintain this basic configuration that's shown here.
Well, this configuration seems to assume the 10-foot drop in grade.
Yep.
And so if that is not the case, the building would have to be at the corner,
Right.
regardless of what the picture shows right now.
Okay. Yeah, that's not really what concerned me now. I know that they're required to have a 10-foot drop if they're going to build it like this, but they can't go in and rearrange this later.
Right. Okay. This is the overall layout in terms of the wording in the on the cover sheet of the preliminary development plan. It does capture this layout by specifying that there are basically five development parcels that are reflected by the five areas shown where the buildings are. And they have these sites labeled as the development areas. So there are committing to those five development areas. There are the access points and the road improvements that tie in these locations. So that really forms the basis of the overall layout of the site. This issue gets more, when looking at this particular property, gets more to the specific layout when the site plan for this parcel comes in. At the time of the rezoning, we don't have information on grading. It's not that level of detail that's done at the time of the rezoning. So the grading information and whether or not the site stays basically at its same level, or whether or not, in order to accommodate the development, there have to, the grades are altered to what extent are needed. We don't know that at the time of the rezoning. However, and we just wanted to make sure that you're are aware of this, that by showing the intent to have the building at this location on the site plan, on the preliminary development plan, that presumes an intent to grade the site such that it would be lowered 10 feet 10 feet below grades, because that's the only way that the parking could be located in that direction, in that area. If otherwise, the site would have to be, or that parcel would have to be developed so that it was brought up closer to the street with the parking behind it. And we just wanted to make sure that was clear so that there wasn't any question or any surprises if the plan came in based on this, that there would be the possibility that it would be located deeper with the grades pushed down so that the parking could be accommodated around the entire building.
Okay. And can the applicant confirm that it is the intent to grade this with that being 10 feet below the...
Given the topography of the site and the drop that's on the site, it is the intent of the developer to grade down 10 feet. We do understand that we will need to meet the town standards, but it is the intent to grade down 10 feet. As we have shown throughout the entire review process, the lowering of the 10 feet is not just to accommodate development on the site, but it's to accommodate the entire site in terms of ensuring that there's proper, the grades are proper for all access points, that the area to the rear, you know, where the townhomes are, to ensure the proper transition and grade to that part of the site. So in our opinion, that lowering of the 10 feet goes along with the grading of the entire site. Obviously, we have not done a grading plan at this time, but there is a note that's been on the plan from the very beginning that the intent is to lower it 10 feet. But again, it is in conjunction with the development of the entire site, not just the one corner.
Okay.
Maybe we can give somebody else a chance here, John.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I have a traffic
Mr. Evangelista.
And one of the conditions was the payment in lieu of a light at Carpenter Fire Station in Cary Glen. Can you enlighten me as to what that would be, that light would be necessary for? I see in this image, it appears that there was two connections, one to what appears to be a daycare and one to the townhomes, yet neither of those spill onto Cary Glen unless you snake your way all the way through the townhomes. Right. So can you just help me figure out why that would be needed?
Per the rezoning process, they were required to do a traffic study, town issued by the town of Cary, and in that there are parameters or what the boundaries of that, of where those intersections would be studied in conjunction with this site. And in this particular site, I believe was anything within, I want to say, a mile of the site. They had to look at existing signalized intersections or those intersections that we would consider to be major collector roads with thoroughfares. And Cary Glen Boulevard happened to be one of those intersections that was studied. It's an unsignalized intersection currently right now. There's a lot of development potential that's already occurring on Cary Glen Boulevard at Carpenter Fire Station. It's already an intersection that has been targeted for evaluation for a signal. And then given the compounding that we had three other developments already approved, they all had a requirement for a signal at this intersection. They all collectively kind of put their heads together and said it's better maybe if we split the cost of this signal amongst 4 developments instead of one was a better idea. So I commend them for all getting together and coming up with a funding strategy for that. And that's what you see in the report today is a partial payment for what their contribution would be for traffic processing going through that intersection.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay.
Other questions?
While Ms. Jensen's not too far away, can you define what a leftover is?
A leftover, in this particular case, it's on a median divided facility. The driveway coming out is a right-in, right-out, but it allows for a left turn in provision from the median. So, but it does not allow any left turn exit out of the development. So that's what we refer to as a leftover. in that particular case. And this is what you see on the plan. This actually helps them balance out traffic coming in and out of the development instead of having to go and make a bunch of U-turns to come back. The other thing that they had was they also have a full movement driveway on Green Level Church Road that should help also get traffic in and out of that area as well. So the access plan has been fully vetted with DOT, and we've been working on this for about a year with them, and I think everybody's in agreement. This is probably the best plan that we're going to have for this use.
Okay. On this, there's a, I believe that is a pedestrian connectivity connection between, I don't know how to find it, about where the cursor is right now. That's a pedestrian
Yes.
only. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Seeing none, is there a motion?
I'll make a motion. I move that the board forward case number 13 REZ 17 to the town council with a recommendation for approval as it is consistent with a comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans and is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons set forth in the staff report and the presentation.
Second.
Also, okay.
Whoever wins.
Mr. Miller, I'm going to give that one to you. Discussion.
Well, I think that this is something that the neighborhood wants. It's reflected by the fact that there's no complaints. The people to the east in these townhomes are happy to have this and happy to have the connectivity that has been shown on this development plan. I think the traffic planning is adequate, probably more than adequate. I've been out there several times. I don't really see the traffic volume being an issue at this point in time. So this to me is kind of one of our no-brainers, but I'd hate to be that simplistic about it. So I'm just going to say that I haven't found anything that I'm unhappy with and happy to support the change.
Mr. Werner.
I support the motion. And in driving around that area, it brought to mind a number of comments that were made in the Imagine Cary project that citizens in the western part of the city have complaints over the lack of quality retail, quality commercial construction. And I see this as a real plus for that area. And I realize there are a lot of projects coming online in the future, but I think this is a positive for the citizens of that part of the city.
And I'll say I second it. I can't find any fault with it either. I think they're meeting all the town's requirements, no variances, no exceptions. I'm not really at all concerned about the observation that staff made. I'm glad that staff found it and caught it. I'm fully confident that they'll either grade it or move the building as appropriate. And they've already expressed their intent to do so, and I think that I agree it's going to be a quality development, and just commend the applicant, excuse me, not only on the plan but on the process and involving everyone there.
Yes, I've driven by there a number of times, both to look at this as well as on other reasons. I read the traffic report, and I think the only concern I had on it about was the traffic increase on Carpenter Fire Station Road, however, and at Cary Glen. However, the agreement to put in a light at Cary Glen takes care of that. So I have no problem at all with the traffic. I don't think there's any problem whatsoever. I do like the idea of having pedestrian connectivity at one point where it will allow people from this neighborhood adjacent to it to walk over to stores or anything. There's also road connectivity for driving if you're going to do some shopping that you can't really carry in your hand. You'd be able to drive, and it's not that far out of the way. The fact that they have this behind a store, it looks like from this sort of behind it, and then moving up to the north, would discourage drive-through traffic, which is a problem with some connectivity, but would allow people who are in this in this little division in the townhomes to get over there with the car if they needed to, and also be able to make it very convenient to be able to walk. So one of the problems with having commercials so close to residential, you have two different problems that are conflicting. One is you need a large amount of separation because of the noise, lights, stuff like that. This does provide that, but then on the other hand, you want it to be close enough so you can easily get from by walking and driving from the residential to the commercial, and this provides that. So it sort of meets both objections, or the objection and the reason for having commercial close to residential. So I think in that, the plan is very good. I think this will improve the neighborhood, and so I support it very much.
Mr. Guston.
Just to echo what everybody has said, I think this is a fantastic fit for this neighborhood. You have Cary Park Town Center across the street. If that development didn't exist and this was the first commercial center going in here, maybe a little bit different issue, but since there is already a pod of commercial activity there, this piggybacks well on that, especially in this very high density of residential. To be honest, if residential was going in this corner, I'd have more of an issue with that than commercial going on this corner. I think this is a fantastic fit for that part of town, so I'll support the motion.
Ditto. But I also think that there's a lot of champion trees out there, so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
Yeah.
Good point. Good point.
Seeing no other comments, I'm going to call this for vote. All those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion carries 8-0. And we're going to move on to our last case of the evening, and that would be 13 REZ 22. It's 956 West Chatham Street, presented by Ms. Bierman again.
This is a request to rezone about .86 acres at 956 West Chatham Street. You can see here the site in relation to West Chatham Street and Northwest Maynard Road and the railroad to the west. This is a closer view. There is an existing 9,700 square foot office building on the site that was built in 1979. There are industrial uses to the north, south, and west with outdoor storage of vehicles and equipment. There's also an existing daycare center on the opposite side of West Chatham Street. The existing zoning of the property is industrial. The proposed zoning is office and institutional conditional use, with zoning conditions that would limit land uses to office and school, with the school use limited to 40 students or, well, 40 students and 4,500 square feet of floor area. Cary land use plan designates the site for office and industrial use. According to Cary's GIS maps, there are no stream buffers that impact the site. There are no existing or proposed greenway facilities in the vicinity. West Chatham Street is designated as a major thoroughfare. The nearest transit route is a C-Tran fixed route located on Northwest Maynard Road, about 350 feet north of the site. There was no protest petition was submitted, and there were no speakers at the public hearing. That concludes staff's comments. Now to ask the applicant if he has anything to add, and then be available for questions.
Thank you.
We feel our rezoning request is...
Could I ask you to start with your name, please?
I'm sorry. My name is Hal Stevens. I've been a Cary resident since 1972. We feel our rezoning request is very straightforward. We really have nothing else further to add. We're just here to answer any questions that y'all have.
Thank you. Do we have any questions?
I have one. This would permit office and school use according to the zoning conditions, as I understand it, correct?
That's correct.
And the school use is limited by a condition, 40 students, 4,500 square feet. The office use would be limited essentially by the LDO requirements.
That's correct. Basically,
setbacks, building heights.
that's correct.
And looking at the height, and maybe you can't tell here, it's different whether or not you're within 100 feet of a residential zoning district. Is it? Do we know? There's that one residential.
There's a residential to the rear, but with the between the intervening property and the railroad, I believe that would be more than 100 feet.
That's what I'm thinking. Thank you. That's all I had.
Other questions?
I've just got a curiosity question. How did we come up with the 4,500 square feet and the limit of 40 students? Was that an applicant request? Is that?
That was, those were the conditions proposed by the applicant. Again, some of this driven by assuring that the traffic would stay below the intensity levels that would generate the traffic study. There is an existing 9,700 square foot office building there now. The applicant's intent is to use a portion of that for the school. That being said, there would always be the possibility for a different office building to be built there with the school, and that, so it doesn't limit rebuilding of a different office building and school there, but I think the purpose for this was to accommodate a school within the existing office building.
Thank you.
Other questions? Seeing none, I'm going to ask for a motion.
I'll move that we forward case number 13 REZ 22 956 West Chatham Street to Town Council with a recommendation for approval as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans and is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons set forth in the staff report and presentation.
Do we have a second?
I will second it.
We have a motion and a second discussion. Seeing none, I'm going to call this a motion. All those in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That motion carries unanimously. And there being no new or old business on our agenda and no need for a closed session, I'm going to look for a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second discussion. All those in favor of the motions as stated, say aye. 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 That motion carries unanimously.
This has been a production of Cary TV. Visit the Town of Cary's website at townofcary.org.